All right, welcome to this explainer. Today we're jumping right into John Coley's novel, WHiTE, to figure out exactly why this story is such an amazing, captivating read for middle graders. You know, middle school is already this time of massive transition, right? It's full of intense emotions, and everyone feels like they just don't fit in. So what happens when you take all that awkwardness and throw in ancient magic, body-hopping assassins, and the literal underworld? Well, you get a story that speaks directly to the heart of a young reader.
To understand why this book resonates so powerfully, we're going to break it down into 4 core ingredients: the relatable, magical chaos, the bizarre real-world setting, its comforting approach to grief, and finally, its powerful lessons on empathy.
Okay, so let's dive right into part 1, Magic Meets Middle School and its relatable chaos.
Middle graders absolutely love seeing extraordinary, wild fantasy elements mapped right onto their ordinary, messy lives. It makes the unbelievable feel suddenly very real. Take our main character, Croya. She is living this incredible double life. On one hand, she's dealing with total quintessential middle school problems. She's the new kid trying to figure out how to make friends, she's navigating her relationship with a terminally ill girl named Jane, and she's casually gossiping about a skater who got a concussion. But then, on the flip side, she has a demanding calico cat familiar that insists on calling her Kriya, and she is literally terrified because her jet black hair is suddenly turning stark white and her eyes are flashing blood red in the girl's restroom mirror. She's stressing over normal social dynamics while secretly terrified she might turn into a screaming monster in front of her entire class. I mean, what young reader hasn't felt like a total alien in middle school at some point?
But what the story does so brilliantly is that it totally recontextualizes what we think we know about the monsters under the bed. We all know the myth of the wailing banshee, right? Well, here, instead of mindless terrors, banshees are actually deeply empathetic protectors. They're bound by an ancient blood oath to serve as guides to the other side. This gives a profound, noble purpose to Courier's terrifying new abilities. It essentially tells the middle grade reader, hey, the parts of yourself that you think are weird or scary, they might actually be your greatest strengths.
Moving right along to part 2, let's look at a really quirky, enchanting setting. The real-life town of Truth or Consequences, New Mexico.
The setting here basically acts as a main character itself, and it is such a smart way to engage young minds. We aren't just in some generic, made-up desert. We're talking about real, geographical anomalies that make learning about the actual world super fascinating. Think about these real-life quirks. There are healing hot springs right along the Rio Grande where the Lady of the Lake literally walks on water. There's a wrong way cemetery where the gravestones face west instead of east. You've got extinct woolly mammoth skulls sitting proudly at the local museum, and an entire neighborhood where all the streets are named after metals. It's a setting that naturally blurs the line between reality and enchantment.
And traversing this totally bizarre landscape is our antagonist, Awed. His wildly unpredictable journey across the desert perfectly captures the inventive, chaotic magic of this universe. Kids love action, and Awed's method of travel is, well, it's incredibly unique. He essentially pushes his soul out of his human body and body hops. He starts out as a chameleon, traveling in an airplane cargo hold. Then, he's eaten by a coyote, taking over its mind just to survive the harsh desert. After the coyote gets hit by a car, he inhabits a literal swarm of mosquitoes, and finally, those mosquitoes bite a dying retired landscaper in a hospital, allowing Awed to take over Old Jim. It's gross, it's fascinating, and it is exactly the kind of chaotic adventure that keeps kids glued to the page.
Which brings us to part 3, navigating grief and loss and finding those empathy anchors in the story.
Because beneath all the quirky fun and the magical body hopping, this story acts as a beautiful, therapeutic metaphor for processing profound grief. Croya's mom, Maeve, actually explains the nature of the banshee to her daughter like this. We scream because of our human grief, and because of fey nature. It cuts our hearts when it comes of its own accord. This gives young readers a really powerful, accessible framework to understand overwhelming emotions. A scream isn't just a magical attack here, it's uncontainable human sorrow. For a kid dealing with big, scary emotions that can't quite articulate yet, seeing grief portrayed as a literal physical force of magic is just incredibly validating.
And the story handles the devastating loss of Croya's friend, Jane, with amazing grace. In one scene, Croya is dream traveling and witnesses Jane standing on the waters of the Rio Grande. A magical doorway of white light opens up, and stepping out of it to escort Jane is Croya's own late father. It's heavy stuff, right? But the story doesn't shy away from the tragedy of a young girl dying. Instead, it uses this magical doorway to provide a sense of profound peace and continuity. It shows that love and connection don't end with death, offering gentle comfort to readers who might be navigating their own tough losses.
All right, heading into our final section, misunderstandings and empathy, and what we'll call the villain pivot.
This part is honestly a masterclass in empathy, taught through the eyes of this story's so-called villain. Oath is a druid who has been taught his entire life that banshees are vile magic thieves, and his dedication to stopping them is intense. Inhabiting the aging, dying body of old Jim, he dedicates his waning life force to infusing the school and cemetery plants with magical tracking runes. He literally drains almost all of his energy to spring an elaborate, terrifying blue fire trap atop Elephant Butte, just to rid the world of what he firmly believes is an ancient beast.
But then comes the big realization. The trap springs, the smoke clears, and Aoth charges forward, ready to strike down this beast. But instead, he sees a terrified little girl. He freezes. He mutters, "A monster," and drops his weapon as the realization washes over him. Actually, he's the one acting like a monster. He's been lied to by his brethren. It's a massive, character-defining moment that teaches readers that the people we think are our enemies might just be operating on bad information. Both characters experience this massive pivot. Oath goes from hunting a vile beast to realizing he's trapped an innocent child. And Croya goes from thinking she's being attacked by a ruthless assassin to facing a misled, apologetic man who might actually be a distant, magical cousin. They both immediately realize their initial assumptions were completely wrong. What a vital lesson for young readers. Fear and hatred often stem directly from a lack of understanding. Once they actually see each other, the conflict just dissolves into empathy.
And this incredible empathy carries over to Croya's relationship with her own mother. Toward the end, Croya tells the Lady of the Lake that she has finally forgiven her mom. And when asked what she forgave her for, Croya replies, "I forgave her for being human." Wow, that is some serious emotional maturity. She isn't forgiving her for being a magical creature who uprooted her life. She's forgiving her for being a flawed, ordinary parent just doing her best. It's a really poignant reminder that, hey, adults don't have it all figured out either.
So as we wrap up this explainer, we really have to ask ourselves, what is the ultimate takeaway here? How does a fantasy story about banshees and druids actually equip a kid to handle middle school?
Well, the book succeeds because it simply doesn't talk down to kids. It validates their heaviest, most complex emotions, like grief, anger, and isolation, by giving them physical, magical weight. It teaches that true empathy is vastly stronger than our baseline assumptions. It perfectly blends those incredibly awkward real-world struggles of middle school with a grand, unpredictable adventure. And crucially, it shows that adults are just as flawed, scared, and human as kids are, and they're equally deserving of grace.
Which leaves us with this one final, provocative thought to ponder. If magic in this story is really just a grand metaphor for the terrifying process of growing up, what new, uncharted powers are you discovering within yourself? Maybe the scariest parts of growing up aren't monsters at all, but just new, powerful parts of ourselves waiting to be understood. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.